All right, so no discussion about modules would be complete without a subsequent lesson on the directory structure itself. So we're actually going to get a chance to take a look at the file system finally, and get into exactly what we've been talking about. All right, directory structure. So this is the first thing that you'll notice when you open the Magento file system. Some of you, this will be your first time seeing the code. Others of you, you've been here before. You've done this dance. So in your Magento root, this is not a complete list, but these are some of the important players. You have app, JS, library, media, skin, and var. So the idea, of course, is that at the highest level, you have these kind of keywords that sort of denote what's going on. The important thing to remember, for app, for example, those files are never accessed directly by someone's browser, whereas files under skin always are. Media is for storage, libraries for different library files, and JavaScript are for your, well, we'll look at JavaScript in a second. So, and then, of course, you have index.php, your htaccess file if you're using Apache, and cron.php. So we'll be explaining all of these in a little more detail. So the app folder, this is where all of the big stuff happens. So in the app folder, you have code, which contains all of the code pools, community, core, and local. You have the design folder, and so this is where your templates and layout and some of your locale things are. If you're using some kind of custom translation files, and you actually have the locale folder itself, for different languages. So then you have JS, and everyone always gets excited when they see jQuery here, but it's jQuery is just an example of if you're using some sort of JavaScript framework, which is a decision you should make lightly because Magento, of course, uses Prototype and Scriptaculous. But you would include it under this JS folder as opposed to the JS folder under Skin, unless you're only using a library for a particular theme. So basically, JavaScript files that are only used in a given theme may be put here. Now, just a quick note, because I always get asked the question, why? Why does Magento settle on Prototype? Well, the reason was development was started years and years ago, and at the time, jQuery was very young and was not suitable for what they wanted to do. Some good news, as far as I know, jQuery will be the framework of choice for Magento 2. I haven't seen that myself yet, but that's what I've been told. So, anyway, the takeaway is that if you have some sort of, whether it's a custom library or external library, this is most likely where you're going to want to put it. I'll show you the ways via the layout that you can include files from either place in a given request or across the site. So the library folder is somewhat analogous. You have all these different libraries that Magento uses. The autoloader, which we will be looking at in detail, the autoloader actually can access this directory. So we'll look at the implications of that later on. But the two big ones here, of course, are Varian and Zen. So Varian, this was, of course, Magento before it was Magento Incorporated. And then for Zen Framework, well, we talked about that in the last lesson. That's where the Zen Framework files live. So let's see, anything else? Yeah, the Lynn Libertine font. That's one more thing, because I get asked that question as well. Lynn Libertine font, that's the font that's used for your sales PDFs. And yes, I don't personally care for it, but this is the font that's actually bundled with those PDFs and actually makes those PDFs rather large. So moving along to media. Let's see. Basically, the idea is that anything that's being uploaded via the admin, for the most part, is going to end up here for a given module. So your images for categories and products are here under Media Catalog. Downloadable products under Media Downloadable, and so forth. So Yep, that's where you can go and look for that. One side note is that if you are doing some kind of version control or if you're just tarballing your site, you can make sure that you exclude media, catalog, product, cache. Those are all of the images that are requested through the image helper. They get written in their different sizes and hashed and stored there, so you can exclude that folder and still be okay, and you'll actually just keep your tarball size very much smaller, especially if you have lots of product images. All right, so the skin file folder, skin folder, admin HTML, front end, and install. These are design areas. There are lots of areas in Magento, literal areas. You have kind of event areas and configuration areas, but really the one to consider is in this case is the design area. And you'll see admin HTML, front end, and install. You'll actually see these same three folders under app design. So we'll kind of look at how those two sync up in the design lesson that we'll have on Wednesday. But just be aware that obviously for your admin-related images, CSS, JS, you can put it under admin HTML, and for anything on the front end, in the front end. And then, of course, the install, I think, explains itself. So if you wanted to custom brand the install, well, you could do that here. That's actually what the enterprise theme does. var folder is just simply for transient data. Nothing that you care about retaining should be left in var. var is sort of by definition, by design, intended to be emptied out whenever. For example, you can delete the var cache folder entirely. Magento will recreate it if it needs it. Sessions can be stored here depending on your configuration. But basically, anything in here, plan on it going away. So if you care about a certain log file, which would be under var logs, make sure you copy it. All right. So, any questions so far on the directory structure? All right. So there are no questions. It's time to look at the actual what modules look like in the file system, and this is what you'll see pretty much every time you look at a Magento module. Now, for reasons that we'll get into when we look at the autoloader, I can tell you that there are a few files here that are convention-based, and a few that are configuration-based. Now, the ones that are important to remember, well, actually, I guess I'll change that because I guess controllers is somewhat configurable. But for the most part, if you'll remember, block. Well, no, I'm sorry. I'm telling you a lot without actually having, some of you have never seen this before. But let me just say it this way. In a Magento, in the Magento module directory, you'll have block, helper, model. If you have these files, you're not required to have this structure. But you'll generally see block, helper, and model, which obviously would contain files of that type. And your controllers directory, so this is where all of your controller files go. Your Etsy directory. Now, this is where your XML configuration. So I'm sure some of you are familiar with Magento's vast use of XML, and some of you are just about to get into that delicious world. But that's where those files live. And then you have the SQL directory for upgrade scripts. And we'll be looking at those. This is one of my favorite parts of Magento, but that'll be on Thursday. So when you're configuring your module, just suffice it to say that you specify a path that will get you here to block, helper, and model. And so it's possible to change these easily in your configuration, but I always recommend that you use block, helper, and model simply because that's what Magento does, and that's what other developers will expect that you've done. Okay. So again, I guess at any meaningful module, the very simplest module that you could have would only contain an Etsy folder with some configuration file in it, config.xml. Yeah. So for each of the different types, basically what you have is you have the configuration. So from your Etsy config, you have your configuration getting you up to here, up to block. And then you have inside there basically whatever you're passing in. So instantiating things in Magento are done for blocks, helpers, and models is done through factory methods. And these factory methods take what you have configured basically up to a certain part of a string, and then after at the end of the string, we'll just look in the file system using underscores as the important, basically the file system delimiter. So what that looks like, for example, for blocks we use a function called createBlock. So you would see create block. And then for, we could say, let's say we have product view. That's a good block to use. So the class would be, we'll be dealing with this a lot. This is used everywhere in Magento. But just as a preview and just to kind of get you starting to think on how the file system maps to these factory methods that you'll see, we'll take, for example, Mage catalog block. And you see this right here is a string that you'll actually see in your configuration file. In fact, if you want to open up in the Etsy folder here in Mage catalog, if you look in config XML, you'll see this string. And what that does is give you basically the prefix for the class name. And then, for example, if we wanted the view.php file that's in product, you'll have product view. So, Mage catalog block product view. That's a class name. And because of the way autoloader it works in Magento, the class name effectively becomes a file path. And we'll look at that. So what that looks like when we're doing a create block is this. Catalog, product, whoops. So catalog, product, underscore view. All right. Now, what you see in the configuration, Mage catalog block, that is really aliased here. So what the factory method does is it takes this, looks into configuration. If you have your configuration set up correctly, we'll find this, and that's under config global blocks. You'll see a catalog node, and then inside the catalog node, you'll see a class node, which contains this. That's called the class prefix. Simply, it's the first part of the block names for the catalog module. And then everything after this is the actual class that you want to get. So in our case, we want to get product view. So what happens is we build this string out using this, and then this string becomes eventually is going to get passed to the PHP new keyword. So, like you're normally used to instantiating classes in PHP, you would just say, new Mage catalog block product view. What happens, though, is that before PHP would throw a fatal error because it doesn't have this definition loaded. So, when the application is instantiated, you don't have all these files being included and evaluated. It would be really slow if you did. But what you do is you define an autoloader. So PHP goes and looks here, says, or gets this definition, a request for this object, says, I don't know this class. And before it throws a fatal error, it says, do I have an autoloader declared? And of course it does. That's in your Bootstrap file. That's we'll look at that. We'll look at that in a minute. But Mage catalog block product view ends up getting passed to the autoloader. That's variant autoload class. And these underscores get they get converted to spaces. So this whole thing is lowercase. These things get converted to spaces. This one would be all lowercase. Then we run UC words, add slashes here, and that's our file path. So, I don't know if that's going to totally make sense. It takes people a long time to really get this. It's a very important thing, because once you understand this, you'll save yourself a lot of time working with Magento. So, so think about it this way. This is going to look in a configuration node somewhere. I'm going to find the class prefix, Mage Catalog Block, and then we're just saying, hey, I want to use Mage Catalog Block Product View. One other note, of course, is that you can certainly camel case this if you want. I prefer to always keep it lowercase, and Magento does almost all the time as well. There are a few instances where you have camel case class names, but just remember that anything immediately following an underscore is going to be uppercased. Now, this has no implications if you're, as far as the autoloader goes, if you're on a case-insensitive file system. But if you have a case-sensitive file system, which I hope you do if you're hosting Magento, then that may have some implications. But really, just remember that all the way down in the modules, you'll have capital letters for folder names and capital letters for file names, with the exception of controllers, etc., SQL. Because Magento looks there for specific reasons. And in a way, it's a bit of a security feature. It's impossible for the autoloader to include those files. Okay, any questions? I know. It's a lot. It's a lot. But we'll be touching on this in every single lesson, really, for the rest of the class. This is very, very important. It's actually very easy once you're used to it. But I always just have to think about it this way. Catalog maps to some prefix, and then everything after the slash is going to end up being translated to some file system path. And as my last note on this, sometimes you'll see underscores here. You'll see like namespace underscore module name. So you might see Mage underscore catalog, except for the Magento namespace, they left it out. They left Mage out. But for enterprise, they didn't. So you might see enterprise underscore something. Underscores before the slash don't matter. Before the slash, it's just a string. That's a very important, that's something where people get tripped up a lot, and understandably so. But that's all I say about that, because we'll be dealing with this so much. But I do need you to start thinking about this, because this is one of the most important things. This is one of the most important things in Magento, as far as getting classes instantiated. All right, so onward. Let's see. All right, so that's the block folder. And similar, by the way, the similar thing happens with factory methods for helpers and models. And we'll look at all these factory methods as we move on. Now, the controllers. So these are the files that are going to match some requests. So if you're looking at a product page, that actually, you may see a nice URL in the browser, but what's actually happening behind the scenes, through a process that we'll look at later, is there's some configuration, of course, and then some file system matching. But the big thing to remember is that it's little c controllers. So little c controllers, these are your router files that are going to match some route that you're on, and do something with the request, we hope. So for catalog product view, that's a product page. So that would be site.com catalog product view ID 10. That would get mapped through configuration all the way up to Mage catalog controllers. And then, and again, these aren't loaded through the autoloader, but it'll get matched through configuration to Mage catalog controllers, and then from controllers into the file system. It's basically, and then once we get to the controllers folder, it actually just is more like a conventional routing system, in that these are basically translated are matched based on paths. And of course, we'll look at that in detail later. But for now, just remember that the controllers are not included by the autoloader, whereas block, helper, and model are. Okay? You with me? Okay, good. Okay, so let's see. Etsy. As I mentioned earlier, Etsy, it's a place for more XML. The interesting thing, of course, is that XML and Magento, a lot of this stuff, we'll be looking at the different details of this. The important one here is config XML. So this is your module configuration file. Yeah, this one's really important. This is where you store. You can set anything for any spot in the system, any spot in configuration. It's all merged together. You can do that through your module's configuration file. And this is the second place that Magento goes for finding information about your module. The very first thing is in app Etsy modules. That's your module declaration file. And based on what you have set there, we'll look at that structure, Magento will then head here and load the actual module configuration file. Now, they're all merged together, but this is the second stop in as far as initializing your module goes. And then we'll also be looking at admin HTML and system XML on Friday as we get into our admin HTML module. So more on those later. Yeah, helper and model, more of the same. It's this exact same pattern. Different factory method, but exact same process. And the XML configuration is almost identical. You just are changing nodes. So I'll be showing you that. And as I mentioned earlier, the upgrade scripts. So you have install and upgrade scripts. These are through versioning, version number that you specify in your module configuration. These will be, the system will look for, we'll try and find files in here that match certain version number patterns, and we'll execute them. So this is quite simply how a module, you can install a module, and it will do things to the database. Very, very cool, especially if you have a team environment, and you need to set some configuration automatically when someone checks out code from the repo or clones a repo. All right. Okay, so you guys are doing great so far. This is I know this is getting big here. Code pools. So if you remember earlier, we were talking about the app folder, and we have app code. And inside app code are our code pools. Community, core, and local, or in order of precedence as far as the autoloader is concerned, local, community, and core. So what happens with the autoloader is, and if you look in Mage, yes, let's take a look at this really fast. This is very, very important. All right, so I want you guys to open up the Bootstrap file. That's app Mage. So through an initialization process, which we will discuss, a request comes into the index file, index.php, and that file will include appmage.php. So that's here. So again, that's under your Magento root, under app Mage, and this contains the Mage class itself, along with some auto-loading magic. So basically what we have to do is set up this environment where Magento can go and find these classes that are being requested. So again, all these factory methods do is build a class name. And then based on the class name, if we don't have a definition present in PHP, the autoloader kicks in because it's been included here and registered. And we define basically the paths where everything is looked up. So in order of precedence, you have local, community, core, and then lib. So if you have the same file path under local as you do under core, the definition of the file that is found under local would be included first. Hope that makes sense. And there are heaps of tutorials that recommend overriding Magento functionality that way. It's completely wrong. Magento gives you numerous ways to change functionality of existing classes, or core classes, and I'll show you that stuff. Don't use this. You really pretty much should never ever need to do this. So if you look in the lib folder here for variant autoload, so lib variant autoload, that's this file here. Can make this bigger. And this is where your class names are converted to file paths.